The laughter started before I even reached the table. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It was the kind of laughter people use when they think they're safe, contained, smug, whispered behind lifted hands and polite smiles. The kind meant to remind you that you don't belong. I felt it before I heard it, that familiar tightening in my chest, the instinct to slow my steps, to shrink without meaning to. I hadn't been back in this room for years, and my body remembered before my mind did. My sister's engagement party was supposed to be simple. Family, close friends, a small banquet hall with cream-colored walls and gold trim that tried too hard to look expensive. Everyone dressed just a little nicer than they could afford. Everyone pretending just a little harder than usual. Except me. I stood out immediately, not because I was overdressed. Not because I was impressive, but because I was wrong. My jacket was old but clean, my shoes polished but worn. I looked like someone who had learned to survive quietly, not someone who belonged at a celebration built on appearances. My sister saw me and smiled, tight, careful. A smile that said, "Thank you for coming, and please don't embarrass me." I didn't blame her, not yet. As I approached the table where her fiancé's friends were seated, the whispers stopped. Too fast. Eyes flicked up and away. Someone coughed. Someone else took a long sip of wine like it was suddenly fascinating. Then one of them leaned back in his chair and said it just loud enough. "So, you finally made it." The words were harmless on the surface. The tone was, I recognized him immediately. Mark. Sales manager, used to walk past my desk years ago without learning my name. Used to toss comments over his shoulder like scraps. Another voice joined in, a woman this time. "We weren't sure you'd come. You're busy, right?" Busy. The word curled with meaning. I smiled politely. "The way you do when you've been trained to swallow things whole." "Yeah," I said, something like that. They exchanged looks, quick, knowing. Someone laughed again, louder this time. "Still doing that freelance stuff?" Freelance stuff, that's what they called it when I left the company. When I stopped answering emails, when I disappeared without explanation, to them disappearing meant failing. I nodded, still working. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Must be tough, watching everyone else move up." The others shifted, suddenly attentive. This was entertainment now. "Mark just got his second promotion," the woman said, smiling sweetly. "Corporate loves him." Corporate, I felt the word land somewhere deep, heavy, familiar. "That's great," I said, and I meant it. Or maybe I meant that I meant it. Mark tilted his head. "So what do you do these days?" Still, behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, invisible, small. For a moment I considered telling the truth right then, ending it quickly. But I didn't, not because I was afraid, because I wanted to understand something first. I wanted to know how far their cruelty went when they thought I was still powerless, so I said nothing. And that silence, that was when they really started. Silence makes people uncomfortable, especially people who are used to being listened to. Mark filled it quickly. "Hey," he said, forcing a grin, "no shame in grinding. Someone's gotta keep the lights on, right?" A few chuckles followed. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped him either. That mattered more. I glanced around the table. Faces I recognized. Faces that used to look past me. People who had once signed emails with "sent" from my iPhone like it meant authority. People who believed proximity to power was power. My sister caught my eye from across the room. Her smile had faded. She was watching carefully now, torn between stepping in and pretending she didn't see what was happening. I looked away first. I didn't want her intervention. Not yet. The woman beside Mark, Lena, I remembered, leaned closer. She said softly, but not privately. "Not everyone is cut out for leadership. Some people are just support roles." Support roles, I nodded again, slowly, calmly. Inside, something old stirred. Not anger, not yet, something colder. A memory. I remembered the day I'd cleaned out my desk, how none of them asked why I was leaving. How HR sent a generic exit email 5 minutes after I walked out. How Mark had joked, "Guess the pressure got to him," while standing close enough for me to hear. Pressure hadn't broken me. It had clarified things. Mark gestured toward the room. "Must be strange coming back here. Seeing where everyone ended up." "Yeah," I said. "It is." He smiled, thinking he'd won something. "No hard feelings, right?" That question wasn't about forgiveness. It was about dominance, about making sure I still knew my place. "No," I said, "no hard feelings." That was true too. Hard feelings take energy. I'd learned to be efficient. The fiancé arrived then, my sister's future husband, Daniel, tall, polished, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and listened just long enough to interrupt you. He wrapped an arm around her waist and nodded at the table. "Everything good here?" "Great," Mark said quickly, "just catching up." Daniel looked at me, just for a second too long. "You're her brother, right?" "Yes, nice of you to come." Nice of you to come, as if it were a courtesy extended downward. I thanked him. He moved on. The music shifted. Glasses clinked. The party breathed again, but something had changed. They sensed it too. That strange stillness that follows cruelty when the victim doesn't react the way they're supposed to. Lena frowned slightly. "You're quiet." "I'm listening," I said. "To what?" I met her eyes. "To how comfortable you all are." Her smile faltered, just a fraction. Mark scoffed. "Comfortable? This is just friendly banter." "Is it?" I asked. The question hung there, simple, unthreatening, and yet no one answered because the truth had edges. Mark leaned back again, crossing his arms. "Look, man, don't take it personally. We're all adults. Life shakes out how it shakes out." I nodded. "It does, and some people end up on top," he continued, voice casual, "and some don't." I smiled then, not wide, not sharp, just enough. "Sometimes," I said, "it depends on who's telling the story." They didn't understand that yet, but they would. The speeches started soon after. That was the moment they really relaxed. Everyone loves a microphone. It turns cruelty into confidence. Daniel tapped his glass and thanked everyone for coming. He talked about family, about beginnings, about how important it was to surround yourself with the right people. Each phrase landed softly, but I felt the weight of who he didn't look at when he said it. Then Mark stood up, unplanned, uninvited, the kind of man who assumes permission is implied. "Just wanted to say a few words," he said, already holding the mic. A few groans. A few cheers. He thrived on both. He told a story about meeting Daniel at work, about late nights, about climbing the ladder together, about how some of us started from nothing and figured it out. His eyes flicked to me, brief, deliberate. The room laughed. I felt my sister stiffen. Her fingers dug into Daniel's sleeve, but he didn't notice. He was smiling, proud. This was his world. These were his people. "And hey," Mark continued, raising his glass, "not everyone makes it. But that's life. You either rise or you fade." More laughter. Louder now, the kind that fills space so no one has to think. I looked down at my hands, steady, still. I thought about the nights I'd slept in my office after I left, about the bank account that dipped so low the app stopped sending alerts. About the one investor who'd listened when everyone else laughed. Fade. Mark finished to applause and handed the mic back, bowing slightly. He sat down, flushed, satisfied. That's when I felt it. Not anger, permission. My sister looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes searched my face for something, pain maybe, or retreat. She found neither. She stood up instead. "Actually," she said, voice shaking just enough to sound sincere, "my brother hasn't said anything yet." The room quieted, not fully, but enough. I met her gaze. For a split second, I wondered if she knew, if she understood what she was about to invite into the room. She gave me a small nod. I stood. The microphone felt heavier than it should have, warm from Mark's grip. I turned it in my hand once before speaking. "I didn't plan to say anything," I began. Good opening, humble, disarming. But listening tonight, I realized something. I paused, let them lean in, let them assume. I realized how much hasn't changed. A few smiles. Mark smirked openly now. "I left this company years ago," I continued. "Not because I couldn't keep up, not because I failed. A shift, subtle, people straightened. I left because I saw what success looked like here, and I knew I didn't want it." A murmur rippled through the room. Mark laughed, loud. "Okay, man, sure." I smiled at him fully this time. "Back then," I said, "I was told I wasn't leadership material." Mark raised his glass in mock salute. "I was told some people are meant to support," I added, glancing briefly at Lena, her face drained of color. "And some people are meant to decide." Silence now, real silence. "I agreed," I said, "so I decided to leave. I let that settle, and I decided to build something else." Daniel frowned just slightly. "I didn't come tonight to prove anything," I continued. "But since we're talking about where life shakes out," I looked directly at Mark, "I should probably clarify one thing." My sister's breath caught. I heard it. "The company you all work for," I said evenly, "was acquired last year." Confusion flickered, then dismissal. "Yeah," Mark said. "Everyone knows that," I nodded. "What most people don't know," I said, "is by whom." The room held its breath. So did I, just for a moment longer. I didn't rush it. Silence is only powerful if you're willing to stay inside it. I scanned the room slowly, letting faces register what they'd just heard. Confusion, mild annoyance, a few polite smiles waiting for the punchline. Mark leaned back, relaxed. "All right," he said. And I looked at him, really looked, at the confidence built on borrowed ground. "By me," I said. One word, flat, unembellished. The room didn't explode the way movies pretend it does. There was no gasp, no dramatic drop of glasses, just a strange, collective hesitation, like everyone had inhaled at the same time and forgotten how to exhale. Then Mark laughed, a short bark, defensive. "Okay, that's funny." I said nothing. Daniel's smile faltered. "Is this a joke?" "No," I said. "It's just not public-facing information." Lena's hand tightened around her wineglass. "You're saying what exactly?" I'm saying, I replied, that the freelance work you joked about funded a holding group. That group acquired a controlling stake in your parent company 18 months ago. Someone whispered, that's not possible. It is, I said, and it happened quietly, on purpose. Mark shook his head, still smiling, but his eyes had changed. You expect us to believe you own. I don't own you, I interrupted gently. I own shares and influence and final approval on executive decisions. Daniel stepped closer. Why wouldn't this be common knowledge? Because power doesn't need applause, I said. It needs leverage. The word landed hard. I could see it clicking now. Not belief, fear, the realization that this wasn't a performance, that the ground they'd been standing on had shifted without warning. Mark stood up abruptly. This is inappropriate. Inappropriate, I echoed. Like public humiliation. He flushed. You're making a scene at your sister's engagement. I glanced at her. She looked pale, but she was listening, finally listening. I didn't start this, I said. I just finished it. Daniel exhaled slowly. If what you're saying is true, it is. Then why now? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Because tonight, I said, you felt safe. I turned back to the room. You felt comfortable mocking someone you believed had no power, no protection, no voice. No one spoke. And I wanted to see who you were when you thought there were no consequences. Mark's jaw tightened. So what, this is revenge? I considered it. No, I said. This is information. I handed the microphone back to my sister. My hands were steady, hers were not. I'm not here to threaten anyone, I added. Your jobs are safe for now. That word rippled through them like electricity. But culture, I continued, comes from the top, and I don't like what I've seen tonight. I met Mark's eyes one last time, especially from people who think cruelty is confidence. I stepped away from the table. Behind me, the party didn't resume. It fractured, and for the first time in years, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, relief, but it wouldn't last. The days after the engagement party were quieter than I expected. No angry calls, no dramatic emails, no public fallout. That was how I knew the damage had been real. People who still feel powerful make noise. People who realize they're exposed go silent. My sister didn't call either. Not that night, not the next morning. I told myself it was shock. I told myself she needed time. But a small part of me, one I tried to keep buried, recognized the pattern. Distance had always been her first defense. Work continued as usual. Meetings, reports, numbers moving across screens. From the outside, nothing had changed. Underneath, everything had. I requested a cultural audit 2 days later. Routine language. Neutral phrasing, no names attached, just questions, patterns, complaints that had been buried in exit interviews and HR files no one bothered to read. Mark's name surfaced fast. So did Lena's. So did Daniel's. Not crimes, nothing dramatic, just consistency. The same quiet notes repeated across years. Dismissive behavior, favoritism, challenging personality, hard to approach, great with leadership, difficult with subordinates. The kind of feedback that never stops a promotion. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't angry reading it. I was tired. That evening, my sister finally called. I didn't know, she said immediately, as if saying it fast would make it true. I believe you, I replied. She hesitated. Did you have to do it like that? There it was. Not were they wrong, not are you okay. Just why did you make it uncomfortable? I didn't plan it, I said. I reacted. You embarrassed Daniel, she said. You embarrassed me. I closed my eyes. They mocked me. A pause, then quieter. It was just jokes. Were they? I asked. Silence stretched between us, heavy, familiar. He's under a lot of pressure, she said finally. So am I thought, but I didn't say it. I didn't tell you about the company because I didn't want this exact conversation, I said. I wanted to be your brother, not a complication. She exhaled sharply. Well, now everything is complicated. We ended the call politely, carefully, like strangers afraid of saying the wrong thing. The next morning, I approved a restructuring proposal, not targeted, systemic, middle management evaluations, anonymous upward feedback, external oversight. The kind of changes that make people nervous without pointing fingers. Mark emailed me within an hour. Subject line, request for clarification. The message was long, defensive, filled with corporate language and forced humility. He never apologized, not once. He asked for a meeting. I declined. Lena tried a different approach, shorter email, warmer tone. She mentioned the party, said she hoped there were no hard feelings, said she admired my journey. I archived it. Daniel didn't reach out at all. 2 weeks later, Mark was placed on performance review. 3 weeks after that, he resigned. Officially, it was his choice. Unofficially, he'd realized something worse than punishment was coming. He'd been seen, and once someone really sees you, the room never feels safe again. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Mark's resignation didn't bring the satisfaction people imagine. There was no closure, No moment where the past neatly folded itself away. If anything, it stirred something uglier. The messages started quietly. Former colleagues reaching out just to reconnect. People who'd never learned my coffee order suddenly remembering my name. Compliments that arrived too late to mean anything. I ignored most of them. Then Daniel requested a meeting. He framed it as family, as damage control, as concern. I agreed. We met in a neutral space, a private conference room, glass walls, no audience. He arrived early. I arrived on time. He stood when I entered, offered a firm handshake. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. I nodded and sat. "What do you want, Daniel?" He smiled thinly. "Direct, I respect that." I didn't respond. He folded his hands. The engagement party spiraled. "You mean the consequences arrived," I said. He flinched, just slightly. "I never intended for you to be disrespected," he said, "but you have to understand perception matters, power especially." "I understand power very well," I replied. "That's why I don't perform it." He leaned forward. "Then why reveal it at all?" I met his eyes. "Because people treat you differently when they think you matter." A beat. "And I wanted to see how you treated someone you thought didn't." His jaw tightened. "This is about Mark. This is about culture." He exhaled slowly. "My career is at risk. Was mine ever safe?" I asked. Silence. "I love your sister," he said. "I don't want this to affect us." Us, he didn't say her. "I'm not threatening you," I said. "But I won't protect you from who you are." He stood. "So what happens now?" "That depends," I said, "on whether you think change is humiliation or growth." He left without shaking my hand. That night my sister came over unannounced. She looked smaller in my doorway. Tired, defensive, afraid in a way I'd never seen before. "They're whispering," she said. "At work, at family dinners, about you." "About me?" I asked gently. "About what you did." I stepped aside to let her in. We sat across from each other, years of unspoken things between us. "You always disappear," she said suddenly. "When things get hard." I nodded. "I learned early no one comes looking." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "You humiliated the man I'm supposed to marry." "He humiliated me first," I said. "You just didn't notice." She looked down. "I should have said something." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." That honesty hurt her more than anger would have. "Do you want me to leave him?" she asked. The question startled me. "No," I said after a moment. "I want you to see him." She swallowed. "And if I don't like what I see, then you'll do what you've always done," I said quietly. "Convince yourself it's normal." She stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "I didn't know you were so angry." I shook my head. "I'm not angry." "What are you then?" I thought of the years, the silence, the way cruelty becomes invisible when it's consistent. "I'm done being invisible," I said. After she left, I sat alone in the dark. For the first time, I wondered if telling the truth had cost me more than staying quiet ever did, but it was too late to unlearn being seen. Weeks passed, and the company shifted quietly but unmistakably. Middle management began to self-regulate. Meetings were shorter, sharper. Decisions were questioned not by subordinates but by peers. Culture surveys reflected small changes at first, then momentum built. People started speaking with caution, but also with awareness. I didn't intervene directly. I didn't have to. Mark's departure became a cautionary tale without my saying a word. Others adjusted, not because of fear, but because they recognized visibility mattered more than titles. Then came the subtle tests. Emails phrased differently, CC lines that included names previously omitted, requests for input that didn't previously exist. A few people tried to reassert dominance in subtle ways, but their words carried less weight. My presence, even absent from day-to-day, reshaped the environment. At home, my sister and Daniel attempted normalcy. They visited occasionally, invited me to family dinners. She never mentioned the engagement party again, not directly. But the tension was still there, thin, almost invisible. One evening, she said quietly while we were clearing the dishes, "Do you ever regret it?" I paused, thinking of Mark's smug smile, Lena's polite contempt, the whispers of colleagues too late to be private. "No," I said finally. "Regret would mean wishing I hadn't been seen, and that isn't an option anymore." Her gaze lingered. "I think people are scared of you now." I smiled faintly. Not scared, cautious. There's a difference. Weeks turned into months. My influence expanded as quietly as it had arrived. Decisions that once took weeks now resolved in hours. Productivity improved. Complaints dropped. Engagement surveys, ironically, showed satisfaction rising. People who once mocked now respected, not because of intimidation, but because the rules had changed. The invisible lines had been redrawn, and yet, for all the control, there was emptiness. Recognition is hollow when it comes without personal connection. I had one yes, but the cost was subtle and pervasive. Trust, friendship, casual warmth, things I had long taken for granted, were now strangers. The world had shifted under me, and in the quiet moments I felt like an observer in a life I'd reshaped but never fully inhabited. Then came the message from Lena. It wasn't long, not an apology, not a confession, just 3 words: I see you. I read it twice slowly, not fear, not anger, recognition, awareness, the kind that changes behavior without threats, without displays. I didn't reply, because the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. People notice differently when they know they are being watched. And I was learning with each subtle act how to watch without touching, how to influence without speaking, how to remain unseen yet impossible to ignore. Late at night, I thought of Mark, of Lena, of every dismissive glance, every whispered joke. I realized that true power isn't humiliation. It's permanence, the ability to exist where no one can ignore you, where invisibility is impossible. And for the first time, I understood something I had always feared. It wasn't revenge I craved. It was inevitability. And inevitability, unlike anger, leaves no doors open for escape. The next test arrived unexpectedly. A regional manager, someone I'd never met, contacted me directly. Concerned tone, careful phrasing. I need guidance, she wrote. There are conflicts in my team, and I want to handle this properly before it escalates. I read the email twice. Her team included Mark's old allies, people who had laughed, whispered, and ignored my presence. And now here she was, seeking me out voluntarily. I responded succinctly: document everything. Ensure accountability is consistent. Avoid assumptions. No authority granted, yet she followed every suggestion. Within days, small corrections appeared. Protocols implemented, behavior corrected, culture reinforced. My influence radiated without announcements, without fanfare. People adapted because they had no choice but to operate in a space where invisibility no longer protected them. That night, I thought about my sister again, about the party, about Daniel. They had chosen life as if nothing had shifted, but everything had shifted, even them. I could see subtle changes now. Daniel paused before interrupting, measured his tone. My sister, cautious but curious, observed interactions with a new lens. Then came the direct confrontation I hadn't anticipated. Mark showed up at the building lobby, alone, hands in pockets, posture stiff. The security desk buzzed briefly, then let him pass. His name still held weight but not authority. He found me in my office, quietly reviewing reports. "Hello," he said, voice controlled but tight. "Mark," I replied calmly. "You're early," he laughed, short, brittle. I couldn't resist. I wanted to understand. "Understand what?" I asked. "How you did it, how you changed everything without anyone knowing." I gestured to the office. "Observation, patience, strategy. Influence doesn't scream, it moves quietly." He frowned. "You humiliated me." Publicly, I shook my head slowly. "No, I exposed what was already there. You revealed yourself first." The silence between us was thick. A few memories hovered, whispered jokes at the engagement party, the dismissive laughs, the careless power plays. "I've been thinking," he said, finally, quieter. "Maybe I underestimated you. Maybe I—" "Stop," I interrupted. "Don't attempt justification, that's your weakness." He nodded, swallowing. "So what now?" "What now?" I echoed. "You've already lost more than you realize, and I don't need to lift a finger. You've made yourself irrelevant." His gaze faltered, not fear, not exactly, something heavier, recognition, shame. The subtle understanding that the hierarchy he had relied on had quietly disappeared beneath him. He began again, then stopped. "Mark," I said, soft but final, "leave, consider your options. Decide whether you want to rebuild or watch everything crumble without interference." He lingered, then turned and left. The elevator doors closed before he spoke again. In the quiet that followed, I realized something. Revenge had been satisfying only because it had been delayed, strategic. But power, the kind that endures, is invisible, silent, permanent, and now I wasn't just present, I was inevitable. The next challenge would come, it always does. But for the first time I knew, no mockery, no laughter, no whisper could destabilize me again, because I had seen it all. And now they had all seen me. Months rolled by, and the subtle tremors of change in the company became more pronounced. People who had once ignored or belittled me began approaching differently, not obsequiously, not with false flattery, but with caution. Questions were framed carefully, suggestions included context, and even casual conversations carried the weight of awareness. The thing about influence is that it isn't always visible. You don't see the shift, you feel it. A pause before a joke, a hand hovering over a keyboard. A glance that calculates before it lands. The air itself carries respect when fear isn't enough. Then one afternoon, my assistant knocked gently. "Sir, you have a visitor, wants to speak about a potential merger." I looked up, expecting a name I didn't recognize. Instead, it was Lena. She stood there, polished, cautious, but unmistakably aware. There was no pretense in her eyes, just acknowledgement. "You asked to see me," I said. I thought we could talk, she replied, voice even. About what happened, about the culture, about your expectations. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat quietly, deliberately, measuring every movement. I want to understand, she began. She paused, because I never realized how small we made people feel. I studied her for a long moment. This wasn't apology. This was recognition. The difference is subtle but profound. One allows guilt to wash over you, the other changes behavior. You're late, I said finally. The culture you participated in is still alive until people consciously choose otherwise. I know, she said. I want to do better, not for you, not for anyone else, for myself. That word for myself hit harder than any insult or public humiliation. You'll need more than intent, I replied. You'll need accountability, transparency, consistency. Anything else is just another form of invisibility. She nodded. I understand. I'm willing to start. And for the first time in months, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not vengeance, not triumph, something deeper, control tempered by insight, because this wasn't about proving I could hurt people. It was about ensuring that those who mocked, ignored, or belittled would never again have the safety of being invisible. The company evolved under my watch, but silently. My sister's engagement faded from gossip, replaced by stories of improved teamwork, fair leadership, and careful communication. Mark's absence was a memory. Lena's caution a lesson, and Daniel adapted carefully. Life outside the company, the family gatherings, my sister's smiles, they were quieter now, aware but measured. No one laughed behind hands. No one whispered jokes about invisibility. The room had changed without spectacle. And in that quiet, I realized the final truth. Cruelty thrives in shadows, but influence endures in light. Not flashy, not dramatic, not loud. Subtle, persistent, unavoidable. I had stepped into a room once mocked, dismissed, and ignored. I left it differently, not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted recognition, because I had decided, finally, that being unseen was no longer an option, and now no one would forget. The past was settled, the future inevitable. The following months brought a different kind of tension, one that wasn't dramatic or overt, but quiet, constant, like the hum of a machine you can't turn off. Mark had disappeared from the corporate scene, but rumors of his failures spread quietly. Former allies who had laughed at my expense began second-guessing every email, every comment, every decision they made. The invisible hierarchy had shifted, and they knew it. Lena became a subtle ally, not because of friendship, but because survival demanded alignment. She checked her language, reconsidered interactions, and even began mentoring others in ways she never would have before. Her respect was cautious, measured, earned in silence. Daniel tried to assert control at home, but the party had left its mark. I could see it in the way he hesitated, the way he measured his tone when speaking about colleagues, when talking about leadership. My sister noticed too, watching the quiet changes with a mixture of relief and unease. One night, sitting alone in my office, I realized the weight of what I had set in motion. Influence doesn't always feel like triumph. It doesn't erupt in applause or acknowledgement. Sometimes it's a quiet pressure, a shifting tide that no one can resist, no matter how hard they try. I thought about my own journey, about the nights I slept on cold office floors, about the dismissive laughter, the whispered jokes, the constant undermining. I had learned that visibility isn't always granted, it's earned carefully, deliberately, and once earned, it becomes a force that reshapes everything in its path. Then came the most unexpected moment. My sister approached me one evening, hesitantly, in the quiet of the family home. I wanted to thank you, she said softly, for everything, even if I didn't understand it then. I didn't respond immediately. I watched her, remembering the engagement party, the whispers, the laughter. You're welcome, I said finally, but understand this, it wasn't for you. It was for everyone who thought they could define me. She nodded silently. And for the first time, I saw her see me, not just as a brother, but as someone who couldn't be ignored. Life outside the office, outside the company, continued, yet the lessons of the engagement party lingered. Cruelty thrives where invisibility is assumed. Power is quiet, patient, inevitable. And those who think themselves untouchable learn, slowly, that nothing remains hidden forever. I returned to my work, to the subtle oversight, to the quiet but absolute influence I wielded. And in those moments, I realized something profound. Revenge had been a temptation, yes. But inevitability, the kind that reshapes behavior, perception, and culture silently, is far more intoxicating. I had entered a room once filled with mockery, laughter, and scorn. I had left it differently, not by spectacle, not by force, not by noise. I left it with a presence so quiet, so unavoidable, that it demanded recognition. And in that quiet, I finally understood the deepest truth. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to exist where no one can ignore you. And once that happens, nothing and no one is ever the same again. The change wasn't immediate, but it was relentless. I began noticing subtle shifts in the office culture that surprised even me. Decisions that once took weeks now moved in hours, simply because people considered consequences they hadn't before. Meetings were quieter, more focused. Employees who once dominated conversations now measured their words carefully. The invisible boundaries had been redrawn, and everyone, Mark, Lena, Daniel, even my sister when she visited, felt it, whether they admitted it or not. One evening, I stayed late, reviewing reports, and my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. It was from a former intern, a young woman who had been overlooked, ignored, dismissed by many of the people who had mocked me years ago. Just wanted to say thank you. Things are different now. People are listening. I feel like my voice matters. I didn't reply immediately. I stared at the message, thinking of all the years I had been invisible, dismissed, mocked. The irony wasn't lost on me. Power, when wielded quietly, changes more than the powerful. It transforms those around them. The next day, Daniel approached me. His tone was careful, deliberate. I've been thinking about what you said at the party, about visibility, about influence. I want to do better, not for you, not for appearances, for the team. I studied him, measured his sincerity. Actions speak louder than words, I told him. Start there. Over the following weeks, the patterns I had set in motion became evident. Lena organized team workshops, encouraging accountability and respectful communication. Other managers began consulting each other rather than dominating. The culture of mockery, dismissal, and invisibility began to dissolve, not because anyone demanded it, but because influence, once established, doesn't need enforcement. It pervades, it shapes, it lasts. My sister noticed too, finally. During a quiet evening at home, she said, "You didn't just confront them, you changed them." I smiled faintly. Not me, reality did, I just made it unavoidable. And there it was, the ultimate lesson. Cruelty thrives in shadows, visibility exposes it. Influence doesn't demand attention, it earns it silently, inexorably. Mark was gone, Lena had adapted, Daniel had learned. And the whispers, the laughter, the dismissive glances, they were replaced with careful words, thoughtful decisions, and a quiet respect that no one could ignore. I had stepped into a room once filled with mockery and emerged not through vengeance, not through spectacle, but through inevitability. And as I sat in my office, watching the subtle shifts unfold, I realized the final truth. Revenge is fleeting. Recognition is fragile. Influence is permanent. Those who mock you may laugh once. They may even think they've won. But when you exist in a way they cannot dismiss, when your presence becomes inescapable, when visibility is no longer optional, they never forget. And in that quiet inevitability, true power resides. I leaned back in my chair, alone, satisfied, but not triumphant, because power once claimed isn't about victory. It's about being seen, and now I was. No one would ever ignore me again. That night I reflected on everything, the engagement party, the whispers, the laughter, the subtle cruelty that had followed me for years. I realized something I hadn't before. The real power of visibility isn't just in being seen, it's in forcing others to see themselves. To confront the ways they act, the assumptions they make, the little cruelties they hide behind polite smiles. Mark, Lena, Daniel, they all saw themselves differently now. Not because I had shouted, not because I had humiliated, but because the consequences of their behavior were quietly, inescapably undeniable. The office continued to evolve under this invisible authority. Policies were enforced consistently, leadership became more accountable, and the atmosphere shifted from whispered mockery to cautious respect. People still made mistakes, but they were now aware of their actions and the eyes that observed them. My sister visited again, bringing her fiancé. She watched interactions carefully, no longer dismissing subtle glances or hushed tones. Daniel seemed more measured, more aware of the influence I held, not because he feared it, but because he understood it. "You've changed everything," my sister said quietly as we walked through the office one evening. "No," I replied. "I only made it impossible to ignore. Everything else was already there." And that was the truth. I hadn't created the culture of mockery they had. I had simply exposed it, illuminated it, and allowed consequences to follow. Power, I realized, doesn't scream. It doesn't demand applause. It's silent, patient, inevitable. And once it's established, it doesn't fade because no one can pretend it isn't there. Weeks turned into months, and the echoes of that night at the engagement party faded from memory, but their impact remained. People acted differently, not out of fear, not out of revenge, but because they had no choice. The patterns of behavior, once invisible, had been rewritten. Mark never returned. Lena adapted. Daniel adjusted. My sister, she accepted the truth of what had happened, though quietly. And I continued observing, guiding, influencing, without ever having to raise my voice again. The lesson was clear. Cruelty thrives in shadows, but visibility transforms. Influence is enduring, subtle, and inescapable. Those who mock, dismiss, or underestimate you may laugh once, but when they realize they can no longer ignore you, that laughter dies. I leaned back in my chair, alone, contemplating the years of silence, the ridicule, and the slow, deliberate reclamation of power. I had stepped into a room once filled with derision and emerged differently, not through spectacle, not through vengeance, but through inevitability. And in that inevitability, I found a strange satisfaction, not triumph, not joy, but clarity. Because true power isn't taken, it's earned quietly, it's exercised subtly. And it endures long after the laughter has died. From that day forward, no one in that room or in the company would ever forget. I had been invisible once, never again. After months of observing the quiet transformation, I realized something profound about human behavior. People respond not to anger, not to spectacle, but to inevitability. The final test came unexpectedly. During a quarterly board meeting, a former ally of Mark's attempted to challenge a decision I had approved. The tone was sharp, condescending, the kind that used to make me flinch, shrink, swallow. I listened, calmly, let them speak, let them assume the old rules applied. When they finished, I simply asked a few pointed questions, clarifying, precise, neutral. The room shifted. The power they assumed they had evaporated in the face of subtle control. Not humiliation, not confrontation, just inescapable awareness. No one interrupted again, not during that meeting, not in the following ones. My presence, realized through influence, observation, and consequence, was enough. Later that evening, my sister called. She didn't speak of the engagement party, Mark, or Lena. She asked instead, softly, "Do you ever get tired of being inevitable?" I thought about it, about every whispered insult, every dismissal, every day of invisibility, about the patience it had required, the quiet calculations, the restraint. "No," I said finally, "being inevitable isn't tiring, it's necessary." She was silent for a moment, then, "I guess some lessons can't be taught gently." "No," I admitted, "some lessons can't be taught at all, they have to be experienced." And in that silence I understood the final truth. Cruelty thrives only where invisibility exists. Once you refuse it, once you exist in a way no one can ignore, everything shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, quietly, subtly, inevitably. Mark had laughed at me once. Lena had whispered. Daniel had assumed safety. All of them learned differently, not through spectacle, not through revenge, but through inevitability. The engagement party became a memory, a subtle turning point. The company evolved, family dynamics adjusted, and I continued quietly, firmly, observing, guiding, influencing, not for recognition, not for vengeance, but because visibility, once claimed, cannot be undone. I had been invisible once. Now I was unavoidable. And in that truth, I found something more powerful than revenge: clarity, permanence, and the quiet knowledge that no one would ever forget. Because sometimes the most lasting victories are the ones no one hears coming. The story ended, not with a scream, not with a confrontation, but with inevitability. And in that inevitability, I was free.